Good afternoon or good evening, depending on where you might be. My name is Kevin Michael Grayson. This is the KMG show for Monday, September the 6th. Happy Labor Day to you all. Things are getting very strange in the world. Let's start by talking about Rolling Stone. It's Tyler Durden at Zero Hedge. Rolling Stone has issued an update, not a correction or a retraction, by appending the hospital statement to the top of their article. Yes, so Rolling Stone, they heard rumors. Actually, a television station reported that hospitals were being overwhelmed by people who had taken ivermectin, or the eye drug, as I'll call it. And let's see. Here's the correction. Northeastern Hospital System Sequoia issued a statement. Although Dr. Jason McElia is not an employee of NHS Sequoia, he is affiliated with a medical staffing group that provides coverage for our emergency room. With that said, Dr. McElia has not worked at our Sallisaw location in over 2 months. NHS Sequoia has not treated any patients due to complications related to taking the eye drug. This includes not treating any patients for eye drug overdose. All patients who have visited our emergency room have received medical attention as appropriate. Our hospital has not had to turn away any patients seeking emergency care. We want to reassure our community that our staff is working hard to provide quality health care to all patients. We appreciate the opportunity to clarify this issue, and as always, we value our community's support. Glenn Greenwald commented, the only reason Rolling Stone is calling this an update, as opposed to what it is so plainly is, a retraction, is because liberal outlets know that their readers don't care at all if they publish fake news as long as it's done with the right political motives and goals. Stephen Miller had tweeted all the usual suspects. Let's see, and those usual suspects who fell for this story, New York City Southpaw, Rachel Maddow, of course, and Newsweek, and the New York Daily News. And let's see, Greenwald commented on that as well. He said that's the same reason the hardcore Dem Party media loyalists, led as usual by Rachel Maddow, spread this fake story all over based on what appears to be a fraudulent source without checking. Fake news is 100% acceptable if done with good political motives. Phil Kerpen had asked, is Twitter banning purveyors of eye drug overdoses crowding Oklahoma emergency room misinformation? The actual number of patients at the hospital where Jason McElia worked is 0. Pradeep Shankar commented, the fact that Twitter can't bother to ban people who spread this lie shows what a joke their war on misinformation is. And Rolling Stone had printed, even podcaster and anti-vaccine conspiracy theorist Joe Rogan bragged that he took the eye drug along with other experimental treatments after he tested positive for COVID-19. Someone pointed out that this is quite possibly actionable. Leighton Akira Woodhouse commented, just to be clear, Rolling Stone called Rogan a conspiracy theorist in a story that turned out to be completely fabricated disinformation. After Joe Rogan announced that he'd kicked COVID in just a few days using a cocktail of drugs, including the eye drug, an antiparasitic prescribed for humans for over 35 years, with over 4 billion doses administered, and most recently as COVID-19 treatment, the left quickly started mocking Rogan for having taken a horse dewormer due to its dual use in livestock. On Friday, Rolling Stone's Peter Wade took another stab, publishing a hit piece claiming that Oklahoma ERs were overflowing with people overdosing on horse dewormer. It was suspect from the beginning. The report, sourced to local Oklahoma outlet K4's Caitlin Ogle, cites Oklahoma ER doctor Jason McElia, who claimed that people overdosing on the eye drug horse dewormer are causing emergency rooms to be, quote, so backed up that gunshot victims were having hard times, unquote, getting access to health facilities. As people take the drug, McElia said patients have arrived at hospitals with negative reactions like nausea, vomiting, muscle aches, and cramping, or even loss of sight. The scariest one that I've heard of and seen is people coming in with vision loss, the doctor said. Except the article provided zero evidence for McElia's claims, causing people to start asking questions. And while neither K4 or Rolling Stone mentioned that the hospital McElia worked for, NHS Sequoia, located in Sallisaw, Oklahoma, just issued a statement disavowing McElia's claims, which pops up when you visit their website. What about the rest of the state? According to Scott Schaefer, managing director of Oklahoma Center for Poison and Drug Information, since the beginning of May, we've received 11 reports of 11 people being exposed to the eye drug, he told the New York Daily News, which still pushed the eye drug overdoses story despite this fact. Meanwhile, the story has also been picked up by the far-left Business Insider and the Independent, as well as the Guardian, among other notable outlets. Jim Treacher, .substack.com, said nobody even bothered to call the hospital where this guy claims to work. Rolling Stone on its Twitter ran a picture of people supposedly outside the hospital, only they were all bundled up against the cold, and it is not cold in Oklahoma currently. And that Rolling Stone tweet is still up, despite the fact that it is a fake picture. Oh, one hospital is denying an Oklahoma doctor's claim that ERs are delaying care for gunshot victims due to overdoses of the eye drug, a drug being falsely peddled as a COVID treatment. This is it's a shameful story, but this is where we are now. This is where we are. That everybody must be in a state of permanent panic, and so-called deniers are the worst people alive, and I guess bad things should happen to them. Lady Amina at Alpha_Mind7, we are going to shut this country down. Excellent speech. This is from Citizen Free Press, Kane. Excellent speech from a frustrated parent in Las Vegas. He calls on workers across the country to call out of work on September the 7th to protest vaccine and mask mandates. Well, I guess we'll have to see. Joy Reid, the dumbest woman on television, on her MSNBC show, compared Tucker Carlson to Bin Laden. Yes. That's where we are now. An excellent piece at eugipius.substack.com called Vaccine Failure and the Way Out. The corona vaccines don't work very well. Ubiquitous statistics showing that the vaccinated enjoy substantial protection against serious illness and death seem wrong. In some cases, they are probably manipulated. They are certainly confounded by the different testing regimes to which the vaccinated and the unvaccinated are subjected. Once you forget the specifics of efficacy and look at the broader picture, it is easy to see where we are. The vaccines have not reduced corona mortality compared to the same time last year in any jurisdiction that I know of. Countries with high vaccination rates are now seeing the same number of deaths or more as they had at the beginning of September 2020. Time is a flat circle. If you peer deeper, you'll generally find this: the vaccinated remain substantially protected against serious illness or death, but the unvaccinated are entering the hospital and dying at very high rates indeed, as if to compensate. Thus, Israel has maintained the same case fatality rate of around 0.7% before and after mass vaccination. If this is just Delta being more dangerous, then we would expect countries with lower vaccination rates to be enduring truly staggering mortality right now, but they are not. In heavily vaccinated countries, Delta is raging with a rare fury among the unvaccinated, but in lesser vaccinated countries, it is doing nothing unusual. This means that the efficacy statistics are broadly unreliable. The exact reasons don't really matter. Either the vaccines have the power to change the whole picture or they don't. None of this should surprise us. Vaccines against coronaviruses have been used in animals for decades, and none of them work very well. Generally, they begin to fail after a few months. Despite their technical sophistication, our mRNA and vector vaccines against SARS-2 are no different. They had some success when they were first rolled out, but if anything, that probably made things worse. They effectively killed off the older Kent lineage and reduced the overall genetic diversity of SARS-2. Cases plummeted in the United Kingdom and Israel, and Delta emerged victorious from this bottleneck event. When newly vaccinated Icelanders traveled to the Delta-saturated UK for holiday, they did not even enjoy an initial period of protection against infection. They brought Delta back to Iceland, where the new strain circulated among vaccinated and unvaccinated at nearly the same rate. In a world where the symptomatic mostly stay home, corona is locked in a balancing act. It can't make people too sick too soon, or its hosts will remove themselves from circulation and infect nobody. Delta is more aggressive than prior strains, probably to the point of disadvantaging itself in containment-happy countries. The more aggressive earlier replication allows it to get the jump on immunity in the vaccinated, however, who can also tolerate more virus replication with fewer symptoms. Together with ordinary antigenic drift, this would seem to be the mechanism that has brought Delta to prominence. We are probably justified in calling this phenomenon a weak Mirage effect. Our universal vaccination campaigns work just well enough to speed up the evolutionary processes that are always and everywhere optimizing corona. It is impossible to believe that this failure was not foreseen. The scientists who developed the vaccines knew for sure how things would play out. That's why they concluded the trials after 3 or 4 months and vaccinated their controls. It's why they've been talking about boosters from the very beginning. It's why, if you listened carefully, you never heard zero COVID sloganeering coming from Team Vaccine. Only the comparative morons on Team Lockdown ever talked like that. Our politicians and our new public health dictators, on the other hand, remained oblivious to the limited potential of the vaccines. They continue to insist on universal vaccination and green passes, while it is obvious that these will do nothing to influence the course of the pandemic. It is worth asking why, because when you think about it, you can see that the vaccine rollout came with an inbuilt exit strategy. The vaccines arrived most everywhere in the spring as corona was going out of season anyway. Policymakers immediately claimed declining infections as a victory for the vaccines, but they failed to take the next step and declare the war won, either discontinue their case counts or, at the very least, exclude the vaccinated from infection and mortality statistics. Instead, they deployed half measures, devising new regulations that exempt the vaccinated from testing most of the time, while failing to shut the door on the pandemic and maintaining numbers that are just reliable enough to reveal the futility of their policies. This was the second time our brave health dictatorship failed to use the obvious purpose-built exit ramp of seasonality. The first was in spring 2020, after the entire West, with the exceptions of Sweden and Belarus, bought into mass containment and corona infections collapsed everywhere in April. Establishment scientific voices had by this time spent 2 months denying that there would be significant seasonal effects on the basis of some superficial modeling studies. As with the vaccine rollout, denying seasonality allowed them to declare a policy victory. As with the vaccine rollout, the stage was set for everybody to say that they had defeated corona, fold up shop, and go home. This is, you will note, exactly what China did. They tightened official testing criteria, declared the pandemic over with, and never looked back. Western countries, though, kept the ball in the air all summer long, just as they are keeping the ball in the air now. Governments are both more powerful and more paralyzed than they have been at any other point in history. Powers have diffused throughout the realms of bureaucracy. By distributing power in this way, occupational classes ensure loyalty and unanimity across the whole of the civil service, academia, and the press. The consequence is that states have become profoundly and permanently demobilized, incapable of acting according to coherent strategies. Over and over in Corona, we see clear hints of strategic thinking in certain quarters. The exit ramps are among the clearest signs, but these are always overridden by the broader momentum of countless thousands of nameless, faceless optimizers and hystericists who sit on hundreds of boring, pointless committees, performing the same iterative, destructive acts of governments over and over. These are bureaucratic processes of untold complexity, all of them steered in roughly the same direction by a loose system of shelling points. The mysterious power of globalist organizations like the World Economic Forum is the coordination they provide by acting as venues for the occupational elites to formulate policy schemes among themselves and to propagate these plans and ideals through loose networks of affiliated tycoons, journalists, and NGOs. Until now, Corona policy in every Western country has unfolded more or less according to the same script devised by the World Health Organization at the end of February 2020. The final act was supposed to be the wide-scale eradication of Corona after mass vaccination. It is now clear that this will never happen. For the first time since March 2020, there is no obvious international consensus on the way forward. A few countries, or perhaps even a few prominent politicians or public health pundits who did not have their heads up their asses, could change everything. Everyone who is not crazy needs to start insisting on the same simple message. We have to live with Corona. It will always be with us. Biannual boosters for the entire population will not solve anything. They will only reduce the effectiveness of vaccines by encouraging antigenic drift. The vaccines are, at best, a solution for the elderly and the vulnerable only. Everyone will get Corona, even the vaccinated, and children need to get it while they were still young and while it poses no risk to them. In this way, SARS-2 will become an unimportant virus in the coming years. And there's an update. My critics complain that Delta has a different seasonality, so calendar date comparisons are inappropriate. This was only an attempt to simplify. Compare mortality statistics however you want. They have, as a rule, not improved. My critics complain further that Israel's unchanging case fatality rate is an outlier and that the CFR is declining elsewhere. This is true. I only cited Israel to illustrate the shifting burden of mortality and hospitalization to the unvaccinated. Official case fatality rates are obviously determined by local diagnostic policies, and in themselves, they mean almost nothing. And again, this is at Eugypius, that's EUGYPPIUS.substack.com. Let's go to the chat. Hello to Red Sulfur, Amron, Hauper, Metal Mike, Dan, Picasso 88, Brandon Smith, Chad Chadson, our valiant moderator. Thank you for your service. He says, I was looking forward to having Mondays off. Well, I was feeling guilty of, I missed a bunch of Mondays, and I thought, yeah, come on, not that hard. Kontiki Roulette, hello. So basically every article they have published since 2016. I suppose most people were surprised by this controversy because they didn't know that Rolling Stone was still around. Jan Wenner, he turned down repeated offers to sell the magazine for a great deal of money. And by the time he really needed the money, it was obvious to everyone that, magazines are doomed. And he got very little for it. My trail of disgrace, says Daniel Dale, posted an actually to Rolling Stone getting fact-checked. He claims one of the original sources says there was an increase in people having reactions to the eye drug. Oh, good old Daniel Dale. He's done very well for a former Glee cast member, has he not? Hello to Dionysus. And to Head McNeck. Don Willis, hello. My life has been especially horrible, says Dionysus. I thought 2020 was the worst, but 2021 has been worse. Flooding in house about 6 months ago at Hurricane Ida. Metal Mike says, I was watching an X-Men movie recently. The unvaccinated will be treated like mutants. We need our own Magneto to fight for us. Dionysus says, living without power is no fun in Louisiana in the summer. No, I suppose it isn't. Head McNeck says, I made a bunch of phone calls to hospitals on Saturday morning asking them about that story. Turned out to be totally bunk. Tweet took off pretty well, though. So, I'm going to have to mention Australia because they have gone completely nuts there. This is from, what's the source? It's from RT. The Australian state of Victoria will lock out unvaccinated people from participating in the economy, Premier Dan Andrews has announced. Victoria is currently under draconian lockdown restrictions, with residents of Melbourne, who make up the vast majority of the state's population, living under a 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. curfew, forbidden from leaving their homes except to work, buy groceries, or get a COVID-19 vaccination. When the lockdown is lifted, Premier Andrews said on Sunday, future restrictions will apply only to those who are unvaccinated. Quote, there is going to be a vaccinated economy, and you get to participate in that if you are vaccinated. We're going to move to a situation where, to protect the health system, we are going to lock out people who are not vaccinated and can be. Again, the purpose of hospitals is to protect us, not the other way around. And, well, I suppose I'll get to New Zealand, but this happened so very, very quickly. William Briggs, statistician to the stars, writes, Australia returns to its roots, willingly, gratefully, and shaking with fear. We would not have had the pandemic if we did not have sufficient technology to allow experts, elites, and rulers to escape most of the consequences of their bad decisions. People would still have died, of course, but the waves of panic and hysterical overreaction among the masses would not have taken place. These Zoom classes would have been forced to meet in person, and once that was seen, there would have been no justification for lockdowns, which, absent Zoom, would have punished both the essential and non-essential alike. Technology alone, however, was insufficient. Technology, incidentally, includes the implied technology in the trust of experts, i.e. the belief that they could solve the crisis soon. The greed of rulers for accumulating power needed to be there too, but that always is. The way they took power by leveraging experts was somewhat new historically, but rulers always looked down on the masses, so that attitude too was a constant. The real change was the need by the masses to be comforted. They needed to be afraid. They enjoyed their fear, yet they also needed to be told they need not fear, that the end was one easy fix away. Because of the need for fear, this could have only happened then as we shifted toward matriarchal government, towards effeminocracies, which are cultures which accept and welcome non-manly behavior in men. Oh, yes, and here's a tweet showing Governor Newsom of California, quote, women are smarter in politics, smarter in civics, they're smarter in economics, women rule, unquote. Back to Briggs. No country has fallen faster than Australia. Why them and not another, I leave to those better versed in that country's history, or rather herstory. But that it's Australia that is rocketing into the fires fastest is clear enough, and not just because of the corona doom. They are not without resistance, led, not surprisingly, by men. Here's a tweet from Lady Amina again. The Australian federal government is planning to de-anonymize the internet to introduce a social credit system to combat online abuse. Police will have access to individuals' social media accounts, which will be linked to people's passports. Briggs comments, yes, some will find liberty via VPNs, as many do in China, but the masses will voluntarily submit. There is no contradiction here. China is not a matriarchy, although it is somewhat effeminate when it comes to disease, the Chinese being famous hypochondriacs. China grips tightly so the party retains power. Australia is going to crack down So women, weak men, and experts don't need to be insulted. Yes, people cracking under the strain, making the conservative case for vaccine passports. And this is, the Quillette editorial board. Now, you would think at this late date, no one in the big con with any sense of shame would pen a conservative case for article. It is like Jonah Goldberg opposing gape mouth pointing at racism. Both are living memes. Still, here it is in Australia's Quillette, a sort of feminist progressive online magazine, which many take to be conservative, probably because there are some articles that say slow down to the wokest forms of wokeism. In this, Quillette is no different than National Review or one of the many conservative think tanks. The tweak is that calling for government to control the masses through pieces of paper the masses have to carry everywhere all the time forever, so that the authors can feel safe from a minor threat. Not be safe, feel safe. That, friends, is the definition of effeminacy. The level of squeamish terror in shallow breasts of these males, and of course females, must be incalculable for them not to realize the implications of their keep me safe passes. I noticed that Claire Lehman, the editor of Quillette, got very annoyed on Twitter because someone referred to the holding pens in Australia as concentration camps. So she started raving about, demeaning the Holocaust or the like, apparently unaware that concentration camps were first employed by the British in South Africa against the Boers, and that was back in the 19th century. Dr. Benjamin Braddock tweets, crazy how the trucker strike has turned Australia into Venezuela, and there's a total media blackout on it. 24,000 children will be vaccinated in a stadium next week. No parents will be allowed access. And, yes, this is from Gemma Perry at the Daily Mail. Israel is planning to administer fourth COVID shot, which could be adjusted to fight new variants as country battles waves of infections despite hugely successful vaccine rollout. Well, I probably told this before. I remember hearing Malcolm Muggeridge speak, in the 1970s. And he said that he found it amusing that the elite's reaction to the failures of socialism worldwide is we need more socialism. And I've noticed a similar thing with globalism, that the reaction to the failures of globalism worldwide has been we need more globalism. And similarly, the reaction to the failures of the vaccines worldwide has been we need more vaccines and more and more and more. And apparently we're going to be getting oral doses as a supplement as well. The piece by Peter Gregory in Spiked, The Madness of Australia's COVID Rules. There will be no removal of masks to consume alcohol outdoors. Australia was the subject of international mirth a couple of weeks back when the Premier of my native Victoria, Daniel Andrews, appeared to tell citizens they must leave their mask on, even if they're getting on the beers, as we say in these parts. Yes, Australia may have made international headlines for its rather tyrannical response to COVID, for firing rubber bullets at protesters, shooting rescue dogs, and deploying the bomb squad to deal with teenagers at the beach. But as Andrews reminds us, this tyranny is often taking an absurd form. And there's plenty more absurdity where keep your mask on while boozing came from. Here are a few more farcical examples of corona authoritarianism from down under. Take the beautiful football mad state of South Australia. Its chief health officer, Professor Nicholas Spurrier, had a warning for footy fans before a big match in June. If you are at Adelaide Oval and the ball comes towards you, my advice to you is to duck and do not touch that ball. Not one to buckle as the nation laughed at her, the good professor doubled down the next day. When you touch an object, and in this case, this is an object touched by I don't know how many very sweaty men in a football field, sanitize your hands afterwards. And that's advice I would give pre or post-COVID. We have come to expect this from South Australia. This is the place where 1.7 million people were ordered into lockdown with even outdoor exercise banned after the authorities came to believe that a bloke had contracted an especially virulent and hitherto unidentified strain of COVID from a pizza box. It later turned out he had actually been working alongside an infected coworker and had caught it the normal way. Now let's look at sunny Queensland. In January, the state's health authorities made it compulsory to wear a mask while driving alone. Health Minister Yvette Daff explained the reasoning as follows. We want clear, concise instructions for everyone to follow. So if you put on your mask as soon as you leave your front door, no questions, no exceptions, then that's much easier to follow. This certainly reveals the health authorities' low view of people's intelligence. If they don't trust Queenslanders to operate a mask, why trust Queenslanders to operate a car? Australia's most populous state, New South Wales, is not immune to such absurdity either. In July, Chief Health Officer Dr. Kerry Chant, are you noticing a trend here with these health officers? Provided the ultimate excuse in the name of tackling COVID for ignoring people you don't want to talk to. Quote, if you run into your next door neighbor in the shopping center at Coles or Aldi or any other grocery shop, don't start up a conversation, unquote. Not content with getting you out of awkward interactions with people you haven't seen since school, she has also banned browsing in shops. Quote, if you're going shopping, think about what you absolutely need, do the list, get in and out. This is not the time for browsing. New Zealand. Okay, so what's wrong with this story? This is from Nick Perry at the Associated Press. New Zealand authorities imprisoned a man inspired by the Islamic State group for 3 years after catching him with a hunting knife in extremist videos. But at a certain point, despite grave fears he would attack others, they say they could do nothing more to keep him behind bars. So for 53 days from July, police tracked the man's every move, an operation that involved some 30 officers working around the clock. Their fears were borne out Friday when he walked into an Auckland supermarket, grabbed a kitchen knife from his store shelf, and stabbed 5 people, critically injuring 3. 2 more shoppers were injured in the melee. On Saturday, 3 of the victims remained hospitalized in critical condition, and 3 more were in stable or moderate conditions. The 7th person was recovering at home. The youngest victim was a 29-year-old woman, the oldest a 77-year-old man. Court documents named the attacker as 32-year-old Ahmed Athil Mohammed Samsudeen, a Tamil Muslim from Sri Lanka who arrived in New Zealand 10 years ago on a student visa seeking refugee status, which he was granted in 2013. So what would the reaction, would you expect the reaction to be to such a monumental screw-up? Well, this is from Praveen Menon at Reuters. New Zealand supermarket group Countdown said Saturday it has removed knives and scissors from its shelves a day after a man the authorities called an Islamic extremist stabbed 6 people in one of the company's stores. Yes, we have to ban knives now. Spencer Clavin has a piece in the American Mind called Vaccine Regret. Is it too late to give my COVID vaccine? I'm joking, sort of. Even as this Trump-era medical miracle gets transformed before our eyes into a Biden-era pretext for government surveillance and demonization campaigns, I still wouldn't take back my decision to get vaccinated. But I have to say, there are times when the chuckleheads leading this country are so brazenly corrupt, so spitefully dismissive of the American people's legitimate concerns, that I wish I could just suck the damn shot out of my arm. I decided to get the vaccine about a month ago. I waited that long because I simply did not and do not trust the people in charge. That's what it comes down to. I think conspiracy theories about microchips are ill-founded, and the likelihood of cardiac complications is slim for a young buck like me. If I were a pregnant woman being recklessly shunted down the vaccine assembly line, I would have more reason to be more worried, but I'm not. I get a flu shot most years. Left to my own devices, in the absence of the politics, I probably would have been vaccinated long ago. But I was held back by this simple fact. The same smug idiots who lied about the effectiveness of masks, funded research in Wuhan that may have helped create the disease, then lied about that too, then lied about lying, then lied some more, are the people demanding that absolutely everybody get jabbed now, now, now. As usual, they are not trying to convince us by reasoning with us transparently like adults. They are instead resorting to their usual tactics of calling us racist, delusional murderers for daring to question their impeccable wisdom and authority. This kind of behavior does not inspire confidence. There are still some sane countries in the world. This is from Freddie Sayers at unheard.com. Denmark, a country whose approach earlier in the COVID pandemic was thought of as the opposite of Sweden, with early border restrictions and school closures, has now overtaken its neighbor as the most restriction-free country in Scandinavia. An article in Svenska Dagbladet, a Swedish broadsheet, observes, "It seems like an upside-down world all of a sudden that the Danes, who at the start of the pandemic gave Swedish travelers the cold shoulder on the Öresund Bridge and told them to turn back because Swedish COVID restrictions were too mild, are now letting go of the reins altogether." There's a silly woman in Calgary who is the post-media columnist in Calgary. Well, she used to be the editorial editor of the Calgary Sun. Her name is Alicia Corbella, and she is absolutely furious about what's happening in Alberta, where Premier Jason Kenney seemed to come down with a case of great sensibility a few weeks ago. You know, we're going to go back to normal. Oh, no. People in the elite and the media squawked. So, nope, now he's bribing Albertans. UCP's, that's the United Conservative Party's, vaccine bribery scheme is no carrot or stick. It's a slap in the face to the already vaccinated. Talk about reinforcing negative behavior. It's the epitome of bad parenting and bad ethics. She actually comes out and says it, that Albertans are apparently children who must be treated forceful discipline by their ostensible parents, the government or government bureaucrats. So Kenney is planning to give a $100 debit card to everyone who gets the jab. And worse than that, there's a lottery and you might win $1 million. How is this not coercion? Oh, it's a poor person tempted with the tiny, tiny chance of winning $1 million. So this is now, Justin Trudeau has decided that he is a real tough guy, and Aaron O'Toole is not tough enough, because Justin Trudeau is going to do whatever it takes. And freedom, we're not going to have any. Can't afford it. Too troublesome. This is from Holly Mackenzie Sutter at CTV News. Justin Trudeau said his pandemic recovery policies won't be shaped by the demands of what he called anti-vaxxer mobs that have dogged his campaign events in recent weeks, including some who appeared to throw debris at the Liberal leader on Monday. Trudeau made the comments at a steel plant in Welland, Ontario on Labor Day, where he pledged to extend pandemic supports for workers and businesses if his government is reelected on September 20th. That's the plan, just to pay people not to work forever? Apparently governments don't need revenue anymore. They just don't. They can just borrow the money. A noisy crowd of a few dozen people gathered outside the gate to the facility as Trudeau spoke inside, expressing anger over COVID-19 vaccines and pandemic measures. A similar group attended a whistle-stop event in Newmarket, Ontario the night before, shouting slurs at Liberal volunteers, supporters, and the leader himself as he shook hands and greeted people. Trudeau said Monday that he can't back down when faced with the aggressive group as he campaigns for a shot to keep leading the country through the worsening fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. Yes, more and more people are getting vaccinated, and yet the number of cases continues to increase. What does that suggest? Well, it suggests we need more jabs. Yes, there is a small fringe element in this country that is angry, that doesn't believe in science, that is lashing out with racist, misogynist attacks. You see, if you're vaccine hesitant, well, this makes you a racist and a misogynist. But Canadians, the vast majority of Canadians, are not represented by them, and I know will not allow those voices, those special interest groups. Really, Trudeau railing against special interest groups. Those protesters, I don't even want to call them protesters, those anti-vaxxer mobs to dictate how this country gets through the pandemic. So, is everyone going to have to be vaccinated? Once, twice, 3 times, 4? Apparently so. This is from Peter Zimonjic and David Cochrane at CBC News. In a move designed to push mandatory vaccination to the front of the election debate, Liberal leader Justin Trudeau said today that a re-elected Liberal government will introduce protections for businesses targeted by anti-vaxxers and anti-lockdown activists. There have been examples in Canada of businesses or individuals who are choosing to display anger and contempt and look for measures to punish or to go after in the court businesses that put forward vaccine certificates or mask mandates, Trudeau said Sunday. We've simply said that we will be there to have those businesses' backs as they do the right thing. Trudeau also drew attention to his platform promise to establish a $1 billion COVID-19 proof of vaccination fund to cover the cost of implementing proof of vaccine credentials for non-essential businesses and public spaces at the provincial level. Trudeau did not provide details of how protections for business would evolve, but he said the Justice Department is looking at ways to protect businesses from being sued for implementing strict public health measures. Trudeau stressed that this election is a choice between a government that will require mandatory vaccination for people 12 years of age and older traveling on planes, trains, and cruise ships, and one led by Conservative leader Erin O'Toole that would follow a voluntary regimen that relies heavily on testing. Erin O'Toole has basically said that any of those anti-vaxxers who are protesting could be sitting across the aisle from your 12-year-old on a flight south in a few months, but they had gotten tested. That's not good enough. Yes, tough guy, tough guy, tough guy. Erin O'Toole, well, he wants everyone to be vaccinated as well, or almost everybody. This is, again, from CBC, this time Ryan Patrick Jones. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole today pledged to increase Canada's vaccination rate beyond 90% within 2 months as he unveiled the party's strategy to combat the 4th wave of COVID-19. O'Toole's plan relies heavily on persuading more Canadians to get vaccinated through a public information campaign that will appeal to Canadians' patriotism, and by providing incentives such as paid time off work and free transportation to vaccine appointments. It also promises a booster shot strategy to counter waning immunity, an expansion of rapid testing in workplaces and schools, and the accelerated authorization of vaccines for children under the age of 12. Yes, once again, the vaccines apparently have stopped working. So what should we do? We need more shots, many as it takes. There is one party leader in Canada who is not vaccinated and doesn't intend to get vaccinated. This is, again, from CBC News. People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier said he violated Manitoba's quarantine requirements for people not vaccinated against COVID-19 because he believes the rule is unconstitutional. Bernier, who said he decided not to get the COVID-19 vaccine, returned to Manitoba on Monday for the first time since he was arrested by RCMP in June at a rally against public health orders in Saint-Pierre-Jolies. These orders are unconstitutional and immoral, and I will always fight for my freedom, the freedom of all Canadians, Bernier said in an interview. Current public health orders state anyone entering Manitoba must self-isolate for 14 days, although people fully vaccinated against COVID-19 and some essential workers are exempt. Bernier was actually attacked while campaigning. He was egged, but I don't know. He's not moaning about mean words like Justin Trudeau is. This is from Richard Raycraft at CBC. A man hit People's Party of Canada leader Maxime Bernier with an egg at a campaign event Thursday in Saskatoon, one of multiple recent incidents raising questions about campaign security. In a video posted to Twitter, the perpetrator appears to request a photo with Bernier. As Bernier gives a thumbs up, the man smashes an egg into the back of Bernier's head. Bernier then runs his hands over his head, but appears to assure onlookers that he's okay. I egged Maxime Bernier, the individual said in a tweet containing the video. Strangely enough, there's no link to this tweet. I wonder if it's still up on Twitter, like Rolling Stones tweets. Let's move on to Daily Skeptic. And parents fury as schools reintroduce bubbles, face masks, and self-isolation for healthy children. Nonsensical curbs are being imposed on pupils to prevent spread of COVID, despite ministers ending restrictions, reports The Telegraph. Vaccine hesitancy and COVID passes could end the party for nightclubs. With only the double jab led into clubs and even student venues, the nighttime sector faces turmoil, reports The Telegraph. Tory MPs need COVID passport to meet Boris Johnson at number 10. Rush hour tube traffic surges to pre-pandemic levels. Doctor calls for 12-year-olds to be allowed to overrule parents on coronavirus vaccine. Dr. David Strain says some children are mature enough to decide to have the jab without the consent of their parents, reports Sky News. The Free Speech Union's Toby Young has criticized the government for breaking its promises with new vaccine passport plans. It's deeply disappointing. It's very un-British and a violation of our civil liberties. It's a form of discrimination. Government planning an October fire break if hospital admissions remain at current level. More lockdowns. The lockdowns have never worked, but this time they will. It would be irresponsible to allow all temporary COVID powers to expire, says Prime Minister's spokesman. So how is it that, Denmark and Sweden are not crazy? Oh, but they don't count? Let's look at the numbers from Israel. Oh, no, none. Israel doesn't count. Because again, it would seem that the, fundamental difference in human biology. A third of under 40s in England haven't had a single COVID vaccine dose. If the government isn't following the science when it comes to vaccinating children, who is it following? Vaccine passports for theaters will be nail in coffin. Kate Nichols, the chief executive of Hospitality UK, said the government would open itself to legal action if it excluded theaters where people mix but required it in other smaller live venues. It's potentially discriminatory against a younger age demographic and an industry sector. Nichols warned that it could cut customers by 20%. There's a significant proportion of people who don't want to use passports or are not vaccinated. It has settled at 20% in France. We expect something similar here. Hospitality sector faces surge in bankruptcies as government support dries up. Vaccinating young people is unethical. Those vaccines should go to poor countries. Why the government is wrong to claim 12-year-olds are competent to consent to COVID vaccination against their parent wishes. How long is it before the experts are going to be demanding that children in utero be vaccinated, double vaxxed, triple and quadruple vaxxed? Let's see what Jim Kunstler has to say. The upcoming 20th anniversary of 9/11 is soon upon us, and the horrifying videos are back in your face. Whatever way the Twin Towers came down, and personally, I think those airplanes got her done, the demolition provides a potent image for what is happening now. Smoke billows out of the top floors, rather like a person with his hair on fire, and then each giant structure slumps into total collapse, sending shockwaves of toxic dust through the desecrated dwelling place of civilization, the city. That's us in metaphor. Like I said now. America's hair is on fire. A chimeric lab virus, apparently funded by our own government, has been on the loose since January 2020, supposedly. Oh, yeah, I got to be very careful about this. Just the assumption from all of these governments that, no, we're going to pay all these people not to work. We're basically we're going to abolish property rights in the United States, which Biden has done. Oh, the Supreme Court, we worship the Supreme Court, except when they rule against us, and we'll just ignore them. Anyway, in 2019, interest rates in the repo market shot up suddenly from 2% to 10.5%, which would have left a smoldering crater there and turned the global banking system into the biggest ashtray in human history. The Federal Reserve stuffed money into its patron banks like straw into so many scarecrows. But really, the repo event was just a manifestation of the unresolved perversions that ignited the great financial crisis of 2008. The whole banking system had A, disconnected from the gruesome climactic of industrial activity, and B, was drowning in debt created to animate the appearance of financial life in the system. Apparently, the solution arrived at by those obscure power elites was to lock down the retail economy of common everyman money transactions in small businesses and direct the remaining money to save the phony economy of elite banking hokey pokey. The lockdowns thus kept money flowing into the phony baloney stock and bond markets and kept the tremendously profitable games going on in the shadowland of derivatives and other transactional dreck. But the main stack of the building, remember, we started with the buildings, was crumbling in slow motion. And here we are, in the season of collapse where things traditionally fall apart when zombies, ghouls, and monsters stalk the earth. The catch is, we the people are cast in the role of those zombies, etc. Yes, Oscar Wilde was right when he quipped that life imitates art. 20 years of zombie movies have left us perfectly positioned to enter the new economy of the walking dead. That's us. No more middle class for you, America. No more paychecks, no more blue light specials, no more auto loans, no more McHouses, and pretty soon, maybe no more food even. What then? This COVID-19 panic hysteria may well prove to be the greatest self-inflicted disaster in the West since the First World War. And finally, on this dread topic, yes, I can see that public health reasons. No, we're gonna have to censor everything now. No dissent will be allowed because you're killing people. It's not just words on your keyboard, on your screen. It's actually killing people. That's good. As I say, let's go to Berenson's Substack. Pay no attention to the spike proteins behind the curtain. British researchers find a potential mechanism for COVID vaccine-caused heart injury. The preprint came out in July from scientists and physicians at the University of Bristol, one of Britain's top universities. Naturally, it has received almost no attention, even after they presented it in August at the European Society of Cardiology Congress, research that raises doubts about the vaccines, even directly, rarely gets traction. Let's go back to the chat. Okay. Okay, hi from Sydney, Australia. That's Jim Bowden. KMG, send in the Taliban to liberate us from absolute tyranny. Help us. I don't know. It's a mystery. It's a mystery to me. But I've noticed that sort of Australian and New Zealand politics have been feminized for quite a long time. His video was bad-mouthing white people and waving a knife around, so they don't classify that as a hate crime, says Con Tiki Roulette. Red Sulfur says Afghan universities are now segregating by gender, wall between genders in classrooms. Anyone getting bad-mouthed by the media can't be that bad, says Red Sulfur. Anti-vaxxer mobs laugh my ass off, says Dan. Uh, Conti Kirilla says, I just sit around in my pants all day and only go to the supermarket, so COVID changed nothing for me. Governments having revenue slows down the enslavement process, says Brandon Smith. Metal Mike says, what? He shook hands? Isn't that against Theresa Tam's advice? Contracu says, the only purpose for taxes at this point is to prevent those in the middle class from escaping their situation. Steve says, you're once, twice, three times a vaxxer. No, I was thinking, a parody of Rock Around the Clock, just substituting jab. That pretty much writes itself. Respectable commenting name says, am I supposed to believe this O'Toole character won't immediately implement the same totalitarian dystopia Trudeau would? Not rhetorical. His physical appearance makes my skin crawl. Chad Chadson says, I don't think they all stop at 5 months. It will be a twice daily pill. Take that, coronavirus. Dan says, O'Toole is the human form of the Pillsbury Doughboy. Yes, and he also has a girl's name. He has a sinister mien, like he thinks he's making an ain't I a little stinker face, but comes off like the wax figure of a serial killer. Oh, dear. Income tax was temporary in 1913, says Brandon Smith. Yes, and of course, withholding was a temporary measure during World War II. Who came up with the idea of tax withholding? Milton Friedman. Yep. Vax for fantasy. Grandpa Billy Idol. Paul Rosen says, Minnesota State Fair attendance good, minus the mask ninny libsissies. College football stadiums full. Yes, I know the sports ball misgivings. Life seems normal, if only for a brief moment. KMG, what did you think of SDI, i.e. Star Wars, as Popcasso 88? Well, it certainly seems to have frightened the Soviets. My Trail of Disgrace says, have you seen the trailer for the Fauci doc? Looks like hagiography. No, I have not, and I don't know whether I could stand it. I watched some inane TikTok video today. Some woman, Missy Model, she calls herself, a frightening-looking young person, basically saying, get vaxxed now because you're killing us. And they all say the same things. And they all believe that they're so original. Dan says the Fauci trailer has 17,000 down votes. There is a long piece at American Greatness by Victor Davis Hanson, Biden and the left-wing standard of attacking presidents. In just a few months, Joe Biden has wrought a series of disasters that will invoke outrage that dwarfs the concocted anger directed at Donald Trump. As Joe Biden entered office in January 2021, there still roared a left-wing revolution, a woke madness spreading through popular culture and Congress, much of which he indirectly has aided and abetted. It has redefined not just politics, but the rules of the presidency. And the eventual casualty of these radical shifts in protocols and customs will be Joe Biden. Take impeachment, which heretofore had been rare and has still never led to a Senate conviction. Prior to Trump, Andrew Johnson and Bill Clinton were the only presidents to have been impeached. Richard Nixon resigned to avoid it, and both were acquitted in the Senate. Yet leftist congressional representatives introduced articles of impeachment the very first week Trump was in office on the absurd allegation of profiting from his office. The presidency cost the Trump corporations hundreds of millions. The House later went on to impeach him twice without writs of treason and bribery or even high crimes and misdemeanors as set out by the Constitution. Instead, Trump was first successfully impeached for supposedly abusing his power and obstructing Congress. I don't think the average American has ever been pulled over by the police for the high crime of obstructing Congress, historically a presidential pastime, or has been charged with abuse of power, said of every president from Thomas Jefferson to Barack Obama. Trump's second impeachment was even flimsier. He was accused of incitement of insurrection, concerning disturbances on January 6th that supposedly led to the violent death of Officer Brian Sicknick, the fatal shooting of an unarmed Ashley Babbitt, and the entire fable of an armed insurrection. Post-impeachment, we would learn that Sicknick died of natural causes. Strangely, for months, no information about the shooter of Ashley Babbitt or the inquiry into that fatal act was ever fully released to the public. No one was charged with armed insurrection, largely because none of the buffoonish rioters were found either to have carried or used a firearm that day, or were exposed as master plotters with plans to destroy the U.S. government. They may well have been guilty of felonies, but armed insurrectionary conspiracy was not one of them. No matter the precedent had been set that serial impeachments now will be normative when a president in his first term loses party control of the House. Charges may not follow constitutional definitions. There will be no need to appoint a special counsel to build a case on evidence or to hold a formal hearing where witnesses present testimonies and are subject to cross-examination. Joe Biden, by such new standards, would then be in jeopardy should the Democrats lose the House in 2022 on the precedent that the Republicans could bring up anything they wished. Unwillingness to enforce existing federal immigration law, deliberately misleading the American public on the growing catastrophe in Afghanistan, or leveraging a foreign leader to lie with threats of withholding U.S. air power to enhance his own political agenda, or empowerment of and collusion with his son Hunter Biden in past efforts to massage foreign governments for cash on the expectation of future advantageous U.S. government treatment. These may be flimsy charges for traditional impeachment. They are certainly not under the new Democratic model. So a piece from the New York Times about Joe Biden is a very, when the New York Times actually is forced to write a piece such as this one, it tells you that they know, that they're worried, that something has gone wrong. And it is called "Biden Still Grieving His Son Finds That Not Everybody Wants to Hear About It." Well, certainly not all the time. In the hours before Lance Corporal Jared Schmitz, 20, was killed by a terrorist bomb in Afghanistan, he posed for a photograph taken by a bunkmate. In the image, the Marine's brow was furrowed. He flashed a peace sign. This is Jared Schmitz. His father, Mark Schmitz, said he told President Biden days later at Dover Air Force Base, where the two men had traveled to observe the dignified transfer of the remains of 13 U.S. Marines killed last week in the attack on Kabul. Don't forget his name. But Schmitz was confused by what happened next. The president turned the conversation to his oldest son, Beau, who died of brain cancer in 2015. Referring to him has become a reliable constant of Biden's presidency. In speeches, Oval Office discussions, and personal asides, Biden tends to find a common thread back to his son, no matter the topic. But for Schmitz, another father consumed by his grief, it was too much to bear. "I respect anybody that lost somebody," Schmitz added in an interview, "but it wasn't an appropriate time." The Biden administration, seeking to avoid a public rift with Gold Star families, has not pushed back on criticism from Schmitz and other families who have said the president brought up his son too often and acted distant during the ceremony at Dover. But the moment crystallized just how much Biden is still haunted by the memory of a son he had always described to confidence as me, but without all the downsides, and how his anguish over that loss can clash with the political realities of being present. The president still sometimes mentions his son in the present tense in private discussions. According to people who have spoken with him, he carries his son's rosary beads with him, once holding them aloft during a virtual meeting at the White House this spring with the president of Mexico. What does he think the rosary is? Does he think that it's some sort of totem? Like a rabbit's paw? He just won't stop. Biden is not a Gold Star father and should stop playing one on TV, William McGurn, a speechwriter for President George W. Bush, wrote in an op-ed in the Wall Street Journal. Biden has never claimed that his son died in combat, but he has often spoke of his son's overseas deployment and the toll it took on his family. Biden supporters say that military families are entitled to their grief, but that the president is also entitled to his. Well, Biden has, if you didn't know the facts, you could be easily forgiven for assuming that Beau Biden was a combat infantryman who died in the field. And neither of those things are true. He was never in combat. He was in JAG, like David A. French, and he died of brain cancer, unrelated to military experience. I think it's despicable, someone like Biden, to leverage the death of his son as an attempt to evade responsibility for his monumental screw up in Afghanistan. There's a piece on Politico. A private matter, Joe Biden's very public clash with his own church becoming president has brought Biden into direct conflict with conservative Catholics on the most polarizing issue of the moment, abortion. As a rule dating back to the election, this is from Ruby Kramer, actually. The reporters who follow the president go everywhere with him, but two places, inside his home and inside his church. I don't know that I'm trying to think of a president who has made more of a fuss about his religion. Joe Biden, of course, Bill Clinton used to show up in public with one of those leather-bound Bibles, the Bibles that really serious Bible readers have. I don't know if he fooled anyone. Let's see. There have been protesters against him. Moira Sheridan and David Williams outside the church gates carrying faded poster board signs. Both are from Wilmington, both in their late 60s, both Catholics. They were a familiar presence at St. Joseph. They have come at least 20 times since the general election, though they rarely make the pool reports. Williams wore a newsboy hat. Number one, our concern is for Joe Biden's soul, Sheridan told me. They had not come to pray for the president, who was the only second occupant of the White House to share their faith. They had come to block him from participating in the church's most important sacrament. It is their belief that if Biden is going to receive communion, then we don't want him comfortably going in, and it is uncomfortable. Well, yes. Joe Biden takes the position that it's not just that he's pro-choice, as they say. I mean, he is an abortion zealot. He loves it. That is not the teaching of the Catholic Church, but the prelates of the Catholic Church in the United States are, cowardly. That's the only way to describe it. Peter Hitchens talks about the cashless society in his Sunday column in the Mail on Sunday. Are they trying to abolish cash? It seems that the national COVID panic, including wild suggestions that cash spreads disease, has been the pretext for a fierce attempt to march us towards a cashless society. Getting actual banknotes grows harder every day as cash point machines are closed and banks disappear. Even shops that still accept cash often complain that they have no change. A cafe near my office has claimed for weeks that it is mysteriously unable to accept money, so I must produce a card to pay for a £1.25 cup of coffee. Increasingly bureaucratic pubs look shocked if offered coins or notes. You may think they are obliged to accept legal tender, but it is not quite like that. This rule can be enforced only if you are settling a debt which already exists. If they have not given you the goods, then there is no debt, and they can refuse your money and demand the card. I personally loathe and distrust contactless payment, though in recent months, I felt more or less obliged to use it in some places. It makes money too easy to spend and too easy to steal. Where possible, I've chosen not to make my cards contactless, but sometimes there is no such choice. I also noticed that the old chip and pin system has become much slower than it used to be. I shudder to think what might happen in the interval between losing a contactless card and reporting it. The recent increase in the limit on these things to £45 was bad enough. A dishonest person could rack up huge amounts of spending in a few minutes, but on October 15th, it will rise to £100. Does this matter? I think so. I fear very much the next stage will be that shops will only accept payment through smartphones, already preferred by many places. I absolutely do not want to pay for anything through a phone so easily lost, stolen, or hacked. I also resent the idea that all my purchases are being recorded and monitored and studied by someone. At the moment, it's just people who want to sell me more things, But as we've seen with Facebook and Google, it quickly spreads into other areas. If money becomes purely electronic, as I think it is now likely within 20 years, then it won't really be ours anymore. Imagine the power over you which this gives banks and the state. Imagine the problems if it just goes wrong, as it has done more than once in the recent past, with reputable major banks refusing their customers access to their accounts. I used to laugh at the French peasants who stuffed old banknotes under the floorboards because they trusted neither banks nor the state with their savings. Silly, superstitious, backward, old fools, I thought. Now I am not so sure. My advice for now, use cash wherever you can. Welcome it if you are in business. And the government should reform the legal tender laws to oblige traders to accept reasonable quantities of coins or notes for any transaction. Cashless society may sound desirable to those tidy, glinting people who think that all change is progress, but to me, it sounds like a big step towards a brave new world of surveillance, dependency, and a total lack of privacy or real control over your own life. And just an absolutely appalling piece from Alex Nalraste, I don't know how to pronounce his name, and Benjamin Powell in Reason magazine, how mass immigration stopped American socialism. Relatively open borders helped halt the early 20th century welfare state. So to these libertarians, these weaponized autists, turning America into not America is justified because they don't like unions. We can't have nobodies earning too much money because the money, it needs to go to the 1%. They're just not wealthy enough already, and of course it needs to go to shills like these people at Reason magazine. Alex Nalraste is the director of immigration and trade at the Cato Institute, Herbert A. Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies. Benjamin Powell is the director of the Free Market Institute at Texas Tech University and a senior fellow at the Independent Institute. NGO spivs. An interesting piece in the Daily Express on the Aztecs. Archaeology, brutal sacrifice system of the Aztecs. Death was just the start. The Aztec Empire had a horrific human sacrifice system in which death was just the start, a documentary revealed. For the longest time, these stories were laughed off. No. There was not, an enormous room filled with skulls. Well, it turns out there was. So what was the result of this? Cultural relativism. Oh, who are we to say that mass human sacrifice is a bad thing? Okay. Just a reminder that on Friday on the book club, I'm going to be discussing Bernal Diaz's The True History of the Conquest of Mexico, which is a really tremendous book. And some sense finally in Vancouver. BC to cull up to 30 coyotes from Vancouver Stanley Park following attacks. I was getting the impression that the deep greens have become so powerful in Vancouver that they were just going to simply shut down Stanley Park forever. But they're not. Since December 2020, there have been 45 reported attacks on humans in city's biggest park. And there's still morons who are feeding them. Let's go back to Joseph Tainter's The Collapse of Complex Societies. He's discussing the origins of the state. Despite a variety of theories about the origin of the state, there seem to be, as several authors have recognized, two main schools of thought. They are conveniently labeled the conflict and integration theories, while Lenski prefers the term conflict and functionalist. These contrasting views are more than scholarly theories of political evolution. They are philosophies of politics and society whose ramifications extend far beyond academic concerns. As such, they may be nearly as old as civil society itself. Service, for example, traces the conflict school to Ibn Khaldun, whose introduction to history was begun in 1377. Haas extends the dichotomy even further, recognizing conflict and integration views in the political philosophies of ancient Greece and the Confucian-era China. There is thus a remarkable continuous history to basic theories of the state. This fact is interesting in several ways, as will be seen in Chapter 4. The European Enlightenment produced a fluorescence of thought and writing on the subject. The names of Jean Bodin, Thomas Hobbes, David Hume, Adam Ferguson, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau are associated with various approaches to the purpose and nature of civil society. These approaches have occasionally managed to integrate the two contending schemes. In recent times, the major contributors to the conflict school have been by Morgan, Marx, Engels, Child, White, and Freed, and to the integration view by Spencer, Sumner, Durkheim, Moray, Davy, and Service. In essence, conflict theory asserts that the state emerged out of the needs and desires of individuals and subgroups of a society. The state, in this view, is based on divided interests, on domination and exploitation, on coercion, and is primarily a stage for power struggles. More specifically, the governing institutions of the state were developed as coercive mechanisms to resolve intra-societal conflicts arising out of economic stratification. The state serves thus to maintain the privileged position of a ruling class that is largely based on the exploitation and economic degradation of the masses. Conflict theory has reached its clearest expression in the writings of the Marxist school. Friedrich Engels, in his 1884 essay, Origins of the Family, Private Property, and the State, argued that the differential acquisition of wealth led to hereditary nobility, monarchy, slavery, and wars for pillage. To secure the new sources of wealth against older communistic traditions and resulting class antagonisms, the state was developed. The state, according to one leading conflict theorist, is the product of society divided into two classes, those directly engaged in social production and those not. The surplus produced is appropriated by and for the non-producers. The state is the organization of society for regulating relations within and between these classes. The direct producers have no immediate interest in the formation of the state, the agencies of which act in the interest of the non-producers. The state, says Crater, is the formal organization of class-composed and class-opposed human society. In the basic Marxist view, the production and reproduction of subsistence constitute the basis of society. The determinants of socio-political organization are the technical and social relations of production, which are equivalent to the relations of appropriation between classes. Human life is defined by its social character, while a society's structural and superstructural elements specify the uses to be made of an environment, population densities to be maintained, and the like. Since material conditions are, therefore, always culturally mediated, Marxists reject integrationist theories that focus on such things as population pressure and subsistence stress. Integrationist or functionalist theories suggest that complexity, stratification, in the state arose not out of the ambitions of individuals or subgroups, but out of the needs of society. The major elements of this approach are A, shared rather than divided social interests, B, common advantages instead of dominance and exploitation, C, consensus, not coercion, and D, societies as integrated systems rather than as stages for power struggles. The governing institutions of the state develop to centralize, coordinate, and direct the disparate parts of complex societies. Integrationists argue that complexity and stratification arose because of stresses impinging on human populations and were positive responses to those stresses. Complexity then serves population-wide needs rather than responding to the selfish ambitions of a few. Complexity, seen thus, might become a response to A, circumscription and warfare in a limited stressed environment, B, the need to process increasing amounts of information coming from ever more sources, C, the need to mobilize labor forces for socially useful public works and to manage critical resources, D, the need for regional integration of specialized or unreliable local economies, E, the need to import critical commodities, or F, some combination of these. Integration in this view is socially useful And if differential rewards accrue to high status administrators, that is a cost that must be borne to realize the benefits of centralization. Either school, standing alone, has both strong and weak points. I will begin with conflict theory. A conflict interpretation of human society is easy to adopt and certainly comes readily to mind for many citizens of contemporary societies who are not in the economic upper strata. Since greed, oppression, exploitation, and class conflict obviously are characteristics of complex societies, it is tempting to see these as both the source of complexity and its dominant nature. Such a view is not without validity, and any theory of society must take this fact into account. But conflict theory is not completely adequate to explain how complex societies came into existence. Eisenstadt, for example, has pointed out that the failures of the Carolinian and Mongolian empires reflect the fact that such entities must be based on necessary conditions and not solely on political goals. Conflict theory suffers from a problem of psychological reductionism. That is, the emergence of the state is explained by references to the wishes, intentions, needs, and/or desires of a small, privileged segment of society. How this segment comes to hold these needs and desires is not specified, but presumably arises from some universal human tendency toward ambition and self-aggrandizement. The expression of this tendency on the part of those who are economically more successful leads to class conflict and the development of repressive governing institutions. Psychological explanations of social phenomena are laced with pitfalls. If social patterns arise from the wishes or needs of individuals, where in turn do these wishes and needs come from? To the extent that the origin of these cannot be explained, the social phenomenon is also unexplained. To the extent that these are universal, social variation is unexplained. If ambition and self-aggrandizement are universal and lead to the state, why then did pristine states emerge no more than 6 times in human history? How did the human species survive roughly 99% of its history without the state? Why is the state such a recent oddity? Or why were there no states in the Pleistocene? And I'll have more from Joseph Tainter tomorrow. And in the meantime, let's go to the chat. Contracoup says central bank digital currencies will grant a totalitarian level of control over the public never seen before. Fees and fines will be levied without trial or recourse. Deplorables will be crushed. John Willis says it's the only thing keeping me sane in this upside down clown world, hoping for a better day. They will be exposed. They get nothing from me. You know, if it's true that the number of people who are not going to get jabbed, if it's 20% in France and we can expect, 20% everywhere, well, that 20-80 distinction, that's the Pareto distribution, right? So what about the 20%? Well, we see another Pareto distribution that 20% of 20% is sufficient for change. It was 20% of 20% who supported the American Revolution. That is to say, 4% of the population acting forcefully were all that was needed for the 13 colonies to become independent. They are going to implement transhumanism, says Texas Feral Hog. In Rome, an ounce of silver bought 6 hours of hard labor, says Brandon Smith. Once upon a time, a penny was a week's pay. I mean, this is one of the worst things about inflation is that it makes it, impossible for us to understand or even recent history. When you talk about, how many hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars a man might earn, in a year, and you think, well, that sounds like nothing. But it wasn't nothing because, of course, it bought a lot more, and inflation seems to be absolutely raging. I'll give you an example. Occasionally, I will buy a roast beef sandwich at Tim Hortons. Well, up until about a week ago, it cost $3.99. Now it costs $4.49, which is quite a steep increase. McDonald's, during the summer, they have this promotion that $1 would get you a large Coca-Cola. $1 doesn't get you a large Coca-Cola anymore. It gets you a medium Coca-Cola. Many such examples. Caligula 138 says those Aztecs know how to party. Respectable commenting name says, I mean, if you look at the histrionics in reaction to Texas, I think we're past relativism and openly into mass human sacrifice is a good thing. Contiki Roulette says 1,000 years from now, tourists will be visiting George Floyd statues and they will say that people worshipped this god, this idol as a god, and they became extinct soon afterward. Don Willis says, I operate in cash. The last few years have been a series of negative encounters with merchants. They sometimes make comments like, you're old. You know, we are moving away from cash. Bless your heart. Ramsey Paul is going to do a video on how to survive the end days. Texas Feral Hog says the neocons are still Trotskyites who have always worked towards the fall of American capitalism. I remember talking to, back when the CBC radio would let me do commentaries. This was a long time ago. That I remember talking to a producer. I wanted to give a commentary. This was, around the time after 9/11, 2002, in the run up to the invasion of Iraq. But how, the neocons, it's a Trotskyist foundation. The producer was shocked. And he said, is that true? I said, yes, it's true. It's not a secret either. And he said, how about if you talk about something else? Gandalf White 2 says the outlet Church Militant has done a lot of good content on the U.S. Council of Catholic Bishops. Their head secretary, a Monsignor, was found haunting one of the gay hookup apps. Disgusting. Well, a great many of the so-called, how would you call them, conservative Catholics. Oh, see, the real difficulty here was that, where this information came. How did they find out that that this Monsignor was frequenting Grindr? I mean, there's privacy concerns here. Yes, that's seriously what they said. Hello, Gandalf White 2. No, I haven't seen you in the chat for a while. Let's see. Contiki Roulette says they're making them denounce QAnon and ban them from going online. But in Portland, they just release Antifa without charges. Total hypocrisy and double standards. My Trail of Disgrace says Missy Models vids are a bounty of cringe overdrive. Again, frightening looking woman. Palcasso 88 says 3 months ago, the sale price of a pound of bacon at Shoppers Drug Mart was $2.99. This weekend it was $5.49. On the mainstream news, looks like those silly Alex Jones videos from 10 years ago. It is so bizarre, says Contiki Roulette. There's an interesting piece. Just let me, it's already up. I've already got it open in a tab. It's by Ed West, who was the son of the Irish writer Mary Kenny and of the English writer Richard West. And he has a piece called Why I Am Not Renewing My Irish Passport. Hilary Mantel may want to become European again, but I don't. As children, my mother insisted that we have Irish passports. This was not so much to gain a small victory over my English father, but out of a neurotic belief that if the plane we were on was hijacked, we'd be released early as neutrals. This was the 1970s, and obviously by the 21st century, the dynamics of terrorism had changed. Now, if your plane was hijacked, an Irish passport probably isn't going to be of much use either way. But having a green passport, as they once were, can still be extremely useful because around the world, the Irish are loved as warm, charming, and banterous folk, while the English are viewed as cold-blooded Charles Dance types who at some point probably invaded your country. On a press trip to Trieste, I was given a ludicrously large hotel room because, the concierge explains, the city's most famous adopted son, James Joyce, was also Irish. Ironically, Joyce refused to get an Irish passport, but had I known that at the time, I obviously wouldn't have mentioned it, nor the fact that I grew up in England and in cricket test terms am English. The cricket test, Norman Tebbit who devised this. It's a measure of patriotism. So if you're an immigrant, let's say you're an immigrant from India or Pakistan to England. So if England is playing India or Pakistan, who are you rooting for? That is the cricket test. Ed West continues, I only got a UK passport in my 20s and the Irish one has since expired, which is probably unwise since the value of having one has increased sharply since. It's not the fear of being stuck on a plane with Middle Eastern terrorists driving the craze, but being stuck on a rainy fascist island with a bunch of ill-bred gammons. Since the referendum, over 420,000 Irish passports have been issued in the UK. And while for many people it's a practical matter of having access to the EU, for others there is a certain spiritual element. Novelist Hilary Mantel, whose grandparents came from Ireland, is the latest to announce she's got the little book with the harp on it, saying, I hope to loop back into my family story and become an Irish citizen. I feel the need to be packing my bags and to become a European again. As she told La Repubblica, quote, we see the ugly face of contemporary Britain in the people on the beaches abusing exhausted refugees, even as they scramble to the shore. It makes one ashamed. And ashamed, of course, to be living in the nation that elected this government and allows itself to be led by it, unquote. So Hilary Mantel is getting an Irish passport because she favors the invasion of England by people from Asia and Africa. That's very strange logic to me. But Hilary Mantel, who is quite a talented writer, is, she's gone mad. Ed West continues, Celtic nationalism has always held a certain charm for people who are essentially English, from Erskine Childers to Compton Mackenzie to Sean McStephen. It's been given new life in the Brexit era, in which the Celtic world has had all sorts of progressive values projected onto it, self-identified global citizens from England expressing their desire to be Scottish or Irish, countries which are far less racially diverse than the England they despise, no more liberal in public opinion, and in the case of Ireland, part of a bloc that has so far been far less generous to Afghan refugees, and indeed is in many ways more conservative than the country that has just left. I haven't renewed my Irish passport, partly out of laziness and partly out of bloody-mindedness, but it also feels weird right now because Ireland has become a proxy in a parochial English dispute over how ghastly our fellow countrymen are. Although I may regret that next time I book into a hotel in Trieste, or indeed if the plane I'm on gets hijacked. That is Ed West at Unheard. That's UNHERD.com. This is our YOLO moment, says Dawn Willis. Seraphim Goose says, global technocracy is a typological precursor to the beast system. The stabby is a precursor to the mark, etc. Biblically speaking, Melchizedek was a type of Christ, Mary, a type of the church. Okay. What else do we have here? I'm going to be talking about Stan Ridgway in just a minute. And I guess Jim Kunstler has a long piece on the failure of the new urbanism in the American conservative. I think I will talk about that tomorrow. But now I want to talk about Stan Ridgway, who is an American singer and songwriter, active since the 1970s. He was, I suppose, best known, at least in America, for having been in a band called Wall of Voodoo. A few years ago, he wrote a Talking Wall of Voodoo Blues. And I'll read a little bit from it. Well, first of all, I'll just give you the basics. Stan Ridgway, who Stannard Ridgway. I've heard stories that his name is just Stanley or something, but he changed it to Stannard in order to seem, I don't know, different. I don't know whether that's true or not. He was born in 1954 out in the high desert, Barstow, California. And he had a, well, Wall of Voodoo, one-hit wonder, I suppose you could say. Didn't want no MTV, didn't want no VH1. Was a time so long ago. Yeah, we had some punk rock fun. Made a great big noise for all the girls and boys. It was 1977. Now two are gone to heaven. Yeah, I was in an office space there across the street, down an alley, dirty stairs, and a basement underneath. Brendan ran the mask. He played drums. We drank a lot. We started playing underground. People started coming round. Mark Moreland played his guitar, and I clawed there at the keys. Little brother Bruce showed up one day, and now we're three. I had this rhythm box that I got from Yogi Bear. That would be Dawes Butler, the voice actor who voiced Yogi Bear. And Joe and Chaz jumped on to play, and we practiced music night and day, night and day. Hey, the scene was growing out. People everywhere, old hippies, beatniks, glam rock kids, going punk rock, cut their hair. One night we played the whiskey with Miss Ivy and Mr. Lux. Backstage, the record man approached. Yeah, we thought we'd hit the bucks, big bucks. So we put out a record EP. Jim Hill was our engineer, and when it got played on the radio, we could not believe our ears. There it was. So we went out on the roads, started playing near and far, driving in that beat-up van or two or three old cars, driving everywhere. Then the Sharks showed up and circled. The big manager for Sting said, "Sign here, boys. You'll all be stars. We'll go for that brass ring." The contract was like a book, 200 pages long. We signed there on that dotted line, just $1 for each song, just $1. Things started getting wild with the band and me and Mark. We did that methadone a lot and drank that Cutty Sark. Richard Mazda came from the UK, helped us to record in a brand new way. One weekend, Mark's song fell out, the single they still talk about. We made a video with Frank D'Elia behind the lens, Labor Day in Mexico, lots of beans and drugs and friends, but all was gonna bust. Hey, how are chumps like us to know? We took off on that tour so long and played and sang our radio song. Now it seemed that old voodoo dog we had was paying for its fees. We lost control of our own band to the record company. Yeah, I guess we blew it big time. Business got us bent. We played a show for 40 grand and the manager took every cent. Yeah, things got worse, and pretty soon it was time for me to go. I did my best to patch it up, but we were all just big assholes. So if you want to make a band, get ready for a good ride. Don't let weasels, sharks, and fiends and creeps force you to compromise. Didn't want no MTV, didn't want no VH1. Was a time so long ago. Yeah, we had some punk rock fun. Made a great big noise for all the girls and boys. It was 1977, and now two are gone to heaven. The second Wall of Voodoo record, Call of the West, is really outstanding. I guess I first learned of the band. They did a cover of the old Johnny Cash hit, "Ring of Fire," laden with feedback. It was. I used to have a DVD, a collection of Stan Ridgway performances, live performances, appearances on TV shows. And in one of the TV appearances, they're on some late night cable show, and they play "Ring of Fire." And after Stan Ridgway introduces the bands, he introduces himself. He says, "I'm Ramsey Lewis." Ramsey Lewis was a black jazz man. I thought that was funny. So Stan Ridgway, he left the band and he went solo. And, well, I should mention, their big hit, Mexican Radio. Well, I call it a big hit. It got up to, in the United States, it got up to number 58 on the Billboard 100. It was a much bigger hit in Canada, reaching a number 18. But it's one of those songs that, is going to be played for a long, long time. Now, I want to talk about Stan Ridgway's solo career. He was signed by Geffen. Sorry, no, it's original. He was with IRS, the first one. That was the label that Wall of Voodoo was on. And then for the second record, The Big Heat, he was signed by Geffen. And The Big Heat, it's a great album. It's a great album, and it has a hit. It was a hit in Europe, at any rate. The song was Camouflage. It's the old tale of the haunted Marine, the dead Marine, who comes back to life to save a brother Marine. The album version is 7 minutes and 5 seconds long. The single version is significantly shorter and better, actually. That song got to number 4 in the UK and number 8 in Germany, number 2 in Poland. It didn't go anywhere in the United States. It didn't even chart, which is weird. Drive, She Said. You see, Stan Ridgway is what would you call him? A bard, a modern bard, actually. And he tends to sing about ordinary people. And there's a great song, Drive, She Said, which of course is a riff on T.S. Eliot. And it's about a cab driver who gets a female passenger who's just robbed a bank. And she tells him to shut up and keep his hands on the wheel. Meanwhile, he has a fantasy about the two of them after he sees the, sack full of money of them, being on a desert island and him eating something. That's a running joke throughout the song, that this guy's always nibbling on something or other, donuts, peanuts, Slim Jims. And The Big Heat, that's a great song too. It originated with Wall of Voodoo. A lot of Stan's songs are about people thinking that they can get away with things, and very often, well, they don't, because most people, they don't get away with crimes, Mosquitoes, his first Geffen album, it has Going Southbound on it. Oh, I should mention the song that Stan Ridgway did with the drummer of the Police, which was used in the movie Rumblefish. It's great stuff, and the video, it was present on the DVD version of Rumblefish, which is it's a Coppola film, which I really quite like, actually. It's filmed in black and white, and it's exceedingly moody, very European. Stuart Copeland plays drums, of course. He also plays bass and guitar, and turns out to be quite talented at those instruments as well. So you see a very sort of 80s production on Stan's records, not as extreme as many recordings of the time, where they're just overproduced, sterile, horrible sounding records. But Stan's records don't sound horrible. He worked with some fine producers like Hugh Jones. And then we get Party Ball, which is his final album for Geffen. And it has a great song called I Want to Be a Boss. Remember Victor Kiam? Remington Razors? He loved his razors so much he bought the company. It's about a man who is just a dead-end job, who just, he wants to be rich. He wants to be a boss. He also wants to take a 2-week vacation 26 times a year. Add him up, as he says. And I guess IRS put out a compilation, which is the best way to introduce yourself to Stan Ridgway. It's called Songs That Made This Country Great. And it's available from Amazon, but for a shockingly high price of $28. I can't really understand that. Most compilations, people who've been on different labels. You get compilations of their period from this record label or their period from that other record label. Songs That Made This Country Great has 16 tracks and from his solo records. And it has Don't Box Me In from the Rumblefish soundtrack. And it has the single edit of Ring of Fire from Index Masters. And it has a song by Kurt Weill from the Threepenny Opera, Brecht and Weill, the Canon song, which is a nice change of pace. And yeah, that's an absolutely outstanding compilation. And after that, Stan was off into indie land. I guess it was determined that he was never going to be a big star. So no, not on any big labels anymore. His first indie record is called Black Diamond, which I quite like. Stan has been working with a woman, his wife, Pietra Wexton, for quite a few years now. And he had a side project, which his wife worked on. His wife is fully integrated into his band now. The Way I Feel Today. That is it's a real palate cleanser, because it turns out that Stan loves the old songs, standards. You know, Witchcraft, I've Got You Under My Skin, It Had to Be You, One for My Baby and One More for the Road, Oh, What a Beautiful Morning, Rodgers and Hammerstein, Old Man River. He does very well at it, actually. He followed that up with a record in 1999 called Anatomy, which has a, how shall I say, a Saul Bass-like cover. And it's great stuff. And it ends with a cover of 16 Tons. And Holiday in Dirt followed in 2002. And there is a DVD of the videos that were made for it. Ridgway is I guess, a friend of a strange artist, Mark Ryden. Very disturbing pictures. And he and his wife did a record of songs based on Mark Ryden paintings. And Snakebite came out in 2004. And again, Stan Ridgway, he keeps, coming up with the goods. His records got fewer and fewer, again, because there's not much money in this, I suppose. Neon Mirage came out in 2010 and Mr. Trouble in 2012. And his last record came out in 2016. He's also made a record of kids' songs as well. And, as I said last week, in a just country, Stan Ridgway would be rich and famous. But there's little justice in the world, I'll just read you the lyrics to I Want to Be a Boss. Well, I've been doodling on this notepad and I've been taking telephone calls. I can tell this job's at the end of the line and I'm ready for the fall. But I've been watching my boss carefully and he always seems to be having a ball. And then I scratch my head and wonder why I'm down here and he's up the hall. Now, all my paychecks aren't worth the paper they're printed on. I get them Friday. By Monday, they're all gone. There must be some way to change my situation. It's time that I took up a brand new vocation. I want to take a 2-week vacation 26 times a year. Add them up. When I fly to exotic places, my jet will be a Lear. I'll need several secretaries just to jot down notes. I'll wear Gucci loafers and expensive shirts and blue executive exotic coats. Because I want to be a boss, and I'll have people working under me, and this lousy job I'll toss. Well, I'll drive in fancy cars. Well, no, maybe I'll just cruise with a limo and a chauffeur, TV, telephone, and booze. Tinted windows so the common folk can't see me here inside. Maybe every now and then, for fun, I'll give some old coot a ride. Then maybe I'll slip them a $1,000 bill. Then he'll smile and shake my hand, and I'll put him in my will. I'm going to count up all my widgets and digits and all my stuff. I'll make millions in a day, but it'll never be enough. Nope. Not enough. Because I said I want to be a boss, and I just want to take a 4-hour lunch and eat a steak with A1 sauce. I said I want to be a boss, and I'll buy up every stock there is from ITT to Dr. Ross. Now, if I find a product I like, I'll buy up the whole company. Shave my face and grin and smile, and then I'll sell it on TV, and everyone will know me. I'll be more famous than Howard Hughes. I'll grow a long beard and watch Ice Station's Zebra in the Nude. I'll grow my nails like Fu Manchu, keep a row of specimen jars, get other people to work for me. Well, maybe I'll buy the planet Mars and build an amusement park up there, better than old Walt's place. You'll have to be a millionaire to go. We'll smoke cigars and lounge and lace. Talk the talk of businessmen and bosses that we are. So here's to me. The drinks are free because I just bought this bar. It's great stuff. Great stuff. And let's go back to the chat here. Roger Waters is 77 years old, says Dawn Willis. A visionary companion says, visionary Michael Williams was from the Ice-T school of Afro acting. Just look and sound ugly and angry at all times, and you're in like Flynn. You know, he had a part. He was on several episodes of Community. I thought he was quite funny. Yeah, he was angry. And at one point, what Jeff says, you know, something like, you need to dial it down, Sean Penn. And he plays a professor, Michael Williams. And Jeff says, you know, Sean, you know, he's an actor. And Williams says, I know who Sean Penn is. I've seen Milk. I thought that was very funny. Anrun says, is anyone familiar with this German show, Berlin Babylon? Kevin just added it to Theater Thursday. Dean Issa says, I get the feeling KMG really likes those lyrics. He reads it with so much pleasure. Oh, I heard that song many, many, many times. Yeah, Tori Amos, earlier in her career, she sang backup vocals on one of Stan's records. I went to see a Tori Amos concert once. That is to say, my girlfriend dragged me to a Tori Amos concert. And I just consider listening to Tori Amos's music to be absolute torture. But she wanted to see Tori Amos, and I didn't want to disappoint her. So we went to what was called GM Place, hockey arena in downtown Vancouver. And the crowd was overwhelmingly female. And I just call a few times, and I'm walking in the lobby, and these women are staring at me, and they've got hatred in their eyes. What are you doing, a man at a Tori Amos concert? It was very strange. You don't want to say anything about it, Kevin, before I die? Buy the DVD? Not yet. Amos is obsessed with witches, says Dawn Willis. Fembot stuff. It was also in Boardwalk Empire. How his character was handled in that show made me hate it. I started watching that show, Boardwalk Empire, and then I don't know. I think I gave it up after a season, I think. Just Drive, she said, is a fave of mine, says Metal Mike. Okay. Wall of Voodoo is a much better band. Yeah, okay. That Rumblefish soundtrack is amazing, says Jeffrey Pye. I always thought it was better than the film. Chad Chadson says Cuban radio is much better than Mexican radio. My Trail of Disgrace says, I got Call of the West maybe for my birthday in primary school. This song, Call of the West, it's about California, and it's about the Californian dream. And it is one of the darkest things that I have ever heard. So there's a lot of dark songs. Yeah, Hauper says Tori started out with hair metal band before her solo career. Her first record, which she has just disowned for the longest time, wasn't it called Why Tori Can't Read? Something like that. There was a bestseller, in the 50s or 60s, about the failure of the American education system. I think it was called Why Johnny Can't Read. So that's the reference. Coming up later in the week on Theatre Thursday, I'm going to be talking about Jacques Tati's 1967 masterpiece, Playtime. You know, the Sparks Brothers, they attempted for the longest time to get a movie done with Jacques Tati. And then there was a Chinese director. They were involved in years and years of, planning this movie, which never got made. And now, of course, they have a movie out with Leos Carros, the French auteur. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm very much looking forward to it. On September 16th, I'm going to discuss Paul Verhoeven's wonderful movie, Starship Troopers. On September 23, a silent film from the earliest days of cinema, Robert Wiener's Cabinet of Dr. Caligari, a Danish film from 1955 on September 30th, Ordet, which is remarkably moving. And then, yes, October 7th, season 1 of Babylon Berlin. On the book club on Friday, as previously mentioned, I'm going to be discussing The True History of the Conquest of New Spain by Bernal Diaz. On September 17th, a riposte to cultural relativism by anthropology professor Robert Edgerton, called Six Societies. On September 24th, A Holy War by Nigel Cliff. October 1st, The West and the Rest by the late Roger Scruton. And October 8th, The Executioner by Joseph de Maistre. And next week, I'm going to be talking on Music Monday. I'm going to be talking about the Child Ballads. The Child Ballads are a collection, folk music. And they have often been recorded in many different fashions. I'll just read from Wikipedia here. The Child Ballads are 305 traditional ballads from England and Scotland and their American variants, anthologized by Francis James Child during the second half of the 19th century. Their lyrics and Child's studies of them were published as the English and Scottish popular ballads. The tunes of most of the ballads were collected and published by Bertrand Harris Bronson in and around the 1960s. A lot of these child ballads that are about murder. A lot of them, and revenge. And I guess, it was a hard life in the old days. So that's it for today. I'll be back on the air tomorrow at 4 p.m. Pacific, 7 p.m. Eastern. By the way, R.I.P. Jean-Paul Belmondo. If you like the show or any part of it, I'd appreciate it if you'd click on the like button and subscribe to my YouTube channel if you have not done so already. If you would like to make a donation to the live stream, which would be really gratefully appreciated at this time of my life, where I'm still living in a hotel room after more than 8 months, my PayPal account is linked to Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. Once again, Kevin_Grace@hotmail.com. If you were in Canada, donations may be made directly via interact@kevingrace@shaw.ca. And as always, I leave you with this. In these days of social atomization and civilizational collapse, I do dearly wish that you, my dear viewers and listeners, manage to forge a genuine human connection in order to ease the burden. Good night.